She left me on a Friday, no fight, no tears, just a note on the kitchen table and her ring beside it. "I'm sorry, David. Don't look for me. I'm leaving with Ryan." That was all it took to turn my life into silence. I didn't scream. I didn't chase her. I poured a drink, stared at the empty chair across from me, and made a quiet promise. I wouldn't look for her. I'd make sure she had nowhere left to hide. The house was too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that waits for laughter, but the kind that has already buried it. I remember standing at the door, my hand still on the knob, when I noticed something out of place, the faint scent of her perfume, heavier than usual, as if the air hadn't learned yet she was gone. The kitchen lights were on. I could see the table from where I stood. The wine glass she'd left there last night was still half full, a lipstick trace curved against the rim like a memory of her mouth. And next to it, the ring. Her wedding ring. It sat beside a short note folded once, neat and deliberate, the handwriting small and careful. "I'm sorry, David. Don't look for me. I'm leaving with Ryan." That was it. No explanation, no tear stain, no hesitation. Just words sharp enough to cut through the last breath of warmth in the room. I didn't move for a while. My body knew, before my mind did, that everything had changed. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. The world kept doing what it always did, indifferent. I hung my coat, loosened my tie, walked in like any other Friday evening. The habit of routine was stronger than heartbreak. There were 2 glasses in the sink. One mine, one hers. The dishes from breakfast still on the counter. She'd made pancakes. She'd laughed when I burned mine, kissed the flour off my cheek. 12 hours later, she was gone. I poured myself a drink. Not a timid one, half a glass of whiskey, no ice. The first sip burned, just enough to make me feel alive. I sat at the table across from the empty chair and looked at the ring again. It caught the light faintly, spinning slowly between my fingers. A symbol that had meant permanence, now a souvenir of failure. Ryan Miller. The name echoed somewhere in the back of my skull. I hadn't heard it in years. An ex, someone from before me. I didn't know much about him, only that he ran some auto shop up north. I wondered if she'd rehearsed this, if they'd planned it for weeks. Did she smile at me while already packing her heart for another man? I didn't shout, didn't smash anything. Anger would have been a relief. What came instead was stillness, heavy and absolute. A strange calm, like before a storm. I took another sip. The burn spread slower this time. My hand trembled just enough to make the glass clink softly against the table. It sounded like a tiny bell, announcing the end of something sacred. Her shoes were missing from the hallway. Her coat too. The closet door was half open, a few hangers swinging bare. She hadn't taken everything. That detail mattered to me more than it should have. Some part of her was still here, in the faint scent on the pillow, the shadow of her hair on the bathroom floor. I walked through the house as if it belonged to someone else now. Every room was a photograph of our life, frozen, staged, dishonest. The bedroom window was open, letting in the cool air from the garden. Curtains moved lazily, brushing against the night like they didn't care who left or stayed. When I sat on the edge of the bed, I noticed the dent in the pillow where her head had been last night. I pressed my fingers into it, feeling the softness give way, then vanish. That was her. Presence turned absence in seconds. My phone lay on the nightstand. No messages. No missed calls. Just that single piece of paper downstairs saying everything and nothing at once. I thought about calling her, but what would I say? Why? It's a question that never earns a real answer. People leave because they want to, not because they must. They find reasons later, tidy justifications to make the guilt more poetic. I lay back, staring at the ceiling. The whiskey warmed my throat. My heartbeat felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. I imagined her somewhere on the road, headlights cutting through darkness, her hand resting on the gearshift, Ryan's fingers maybe brushing hers. The thought should have hurt. Instead, it only dulled everything else. At some point, I stood again. The night outside was still young, a faint drizzle tapping against the windows. I went back to the kitchen, folded the note neatly, and placed it in the top drawer of the old oak cabinet. Next to the drawer handle, the wood was worn smooth, years of daily touch. I closed it softly, hearing the faint click seal what was left of my marriage. The ring I left beside the glass. I didn't want it. Not yet. Maybe tomorrow I'd throw it away. Maybe never. The whiskey bottle was half empty now. I poured another, slower, the sound of the liquid filling the silence like music I didn't choose. My reflection in the dark window looked like a stranger, calm face, hollow eyes. There was no rage, no breakdown. Just a man stripped to purpose. Somewhere between the second and third sip, I whispered to the empty house, "Don't look for you?" "Fine." The words lingered, barely audible over the rain. I smiled, small, tired, dangerous. And for the first time that night, I felt something close to peace. People expect heartbreak to be loud. Crying, shouting, broken plates, late-night confessions. Mine wasn't. It was a routine with sharper edges. Every morning, I woke up at 7, shaved, made coffee, and went to work. I smiled at the security guard, talked about football, even laughed at the receptionist's bad jokes. To anyone watching, I was the same David Hale I'd always been, steady, polite, a man without drama. That was my armor, my disguise. But when night came, and the house went silent again, the mask slipped. That was when I began my search. I started with the obvious. His name, Ryan Miller. It felt strange typing it into the search bar, as if I were summoning a ghost. Dozens of results appeared, a mechanic in Portland, owner of Miller Automotive Solutions. His photo was there too, taken from the local business directory. A man in his late 30s, sleeves rolled up, a smile that looked practiced. That was him, the man my wife had chosen. I studied that picture longer than I should have. Not out of jealousy, out of calculation. In the following days, I learned everything that could be learned from a distance. His business page, reviews, supplier lists, invoices buried in local directories, all small pieces of a life he believed was private. Every night I collected data like someone gathering stones for a wall. By the end of the week, I knew more about Ryan Miller than Sarah probably did. His garage had 6 employees. He leased the space. He was behind on payments for his equipment loan. He had a partner, a man named Clay Jensen, who had a gambling problem and 2 pending debts with private lenders. The kind of detail that could make a man nervous if pushed. That's how I operated, quietly, methodically. Pain became purpose. I called an old friend, Martin. He was an accountant, discreet, cynical, and easy to motivate if the money was right. We met at a dim bar near the docks. The smell of beer and salt water hung in the air. He slid into the booth across from me, eyeing my untouched drink. "You look like shit," he said. "Thanks for noticing," I replied, managing a faint smile. "What's this about?" "I need information. Private. Not exactly legal." He raised an eyebrow. "You're the last person I'd expect to say that." "I'm full of surprises lately." I handed him a folded paper with a name and an address. He glanced at it, frowned. "Who's Ryan Miller?" "The man who took my wife." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The jukebox hummed something old and slow. Finally, Martin exhaled. "You want dirt on him?" "I want everything. Financials, business records, partnerships. Anything you can get." "That'll cost you." "I'm not asking for charity." He looked at me again, searching for something in my face, maybe hesitation. There wasn't any. He nodded slowly. "Give me a week." 3 days, I said. "Jesus, David. You're serious about this?" I leaned closer. Dead serious. When I left the bar, the night air felt colder. But for the first time since she'd left, I had direction. Not love, not hope, focus. At home, the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt strategic. Every light, every sound, every memory, all part of a larger plan forming in my head. The whiskey stayed sealed that night. I needed a clear mind. Over the next few days, I functioned like a man split in two. By day, I was the professional, suits, meetings, polite smiles. People told me I seemed calmer lately. They called it resilience. They didn't know it was vengeance in disguise. By night, I sat behind my desk, screen glowing blue against the dark, feeding on information. Martin delivered more than I expected. Ryan's tax filings, vendor lists, payment delays, even a list of customers, regulars, fleets, and a few private clients who kept his business afloat. One name caught my attention, a logistics company that made up nearly 40% of his revenue. If something happened to that contract, the garage would bleed. I didn't move yet. I just watched. A good hunter studies his prey before striking. Sometimes, when exhaustion hit, I would drift toward memories. Sarah's laughter echoing in the hall, her scent on my shirt, the sound of her breathing when she slept beside me. Those images should have softened me. Instead, they fueled something darker. A quiet flame behind my ribs. One night, I opened our wedding photo album. I stared at her face, the way she'd looked at me back then. I wondered when that look had changed. When love had become tolerance. When her lips had stopped trembling when I kissed her. I closed the album gently, almost respectfully. The time for grief had ended. Strategy had begun. I printed the first page of my plan that same night. The printer hummed steadily, feeding out paper like confession. At the top, bold letters, Phase 1, Disruption. Below it, a list of names, accounts, and phone numbers. I placed the sheet on the table, beside her empty glass. The faint scent of her lipstick still lingered on the rim. I smiled at that. She had left without looking back, but I was the one writing the ending now. I folded the paper, slid it into a black folder, and whispered to the dark. You wanted freedom, Sarah. Let's see how it feels when everything you ran to starts falling apart. The house answered with silence, steady, approving silence. The trick to revenge is patience, not rage. Rage is noise. It warns your enemy you're coming. Patience is silence. It seeps in unseen, like poison in clear water. I learned that quickly. By day, I smiled. By night, I began to pull threads. Ryan's garage wasn't hard to target. A small-town business survives on two things, reputation and trust. You don't need to burn a place down. You just have to convince people it's already on fire. I created 3 fake profiles. A woman named Lynn Parker, a truck driver called My Call, and an anonymous user who only left 1-star reviews. The first post went up on a Tuesday night. Took my car to Miller Automotive. Paid for a full service. Got it back leaking oil. Won't recommend. Simple. Plausible. Forgettable on its own. But it was only the first spark. Over the next week, I fed the fire. Comments, fake invoices, photos pulled from random forums, carefully staged. I didn't exaggerate. Truth mixed with lies always spreads faster. Then came the whispers. A few local forums picked up the complaints. Someone mentioned overcharging, another mentioned delays. I sat behind the screen, watching it unfold, my heart steady. Every new comment was a small victory. Invisible, satisfying. By the end of the week, 2 of Ryan's regular clients had left him for competitors. I confirmed it through a logistics report Martin sent me. Sarah probably didn't even notice. Or maybe she did, and brushed it off as bad luck. She had always been optimistic, almost naive that way. I could see her voice in my head. It's just a rough patch, Ryan. It'll pass. It wouldn't. Not this time. Sometimes I would open her social media just to look. She'd changed her last name back to read. No mention of me, no trace of our marriage. Just filtered pictures, a brunch with friends, a sunset near the coast, and once, a photo of her and Ryan at a barbecue. His arm wrapped around her waist, her smile wide, relaxed. It should have hurt, but what I felt instead was curiosity about how long that smile would last once things started breaking. Every night, I refined my methods. Posted at different hours, varied writing styles, changed grammar patterns to avoid detection. I even joined local automotive forums, engaging casually, recommending other garages that weren't his. It was like conducting an orchestra of subtle chaos. One evening, Martin called. "You're enjoying this too much," he said. "I'm not enjoying it," I replied. "I'm perfecting it." He laughed, low and uneasy. "You're playing a dangerous game, David. Only if I lose." He was silent for a moment. "And what happens when you win?" I stared at the screen, watching another fake review post live. I'll let you know when it happens. But even hunters need rest. Some nights, when the glow of the monitor started to blur, I'd pour a drink and walk around the house. The silence didn't bother me anymore. It had become company, a steady rhythm behind the pulse of my thoughts. The strangest part was that I began to feel alive again, focused, sharp. Every small victory brought a sense of control I hadn't felt since before she left. 2 weeks later, Ryan's name began to fade from the recommended list of local repair shops. His search ranking dropped. The algorithm had done what I couldn't, made him invisible. I could almost picture him, pacing, confused, checking his phone, muttering curses under his breath. I wondered if Sarah saw him that way yet, cracks showing in the man she'd chosen. Then, late one night, while checking one of his employees' public pages, I stumbled upon a photo. Ryan and Sarah at the garage, standing close, his hands around her waist, grease on his fingers. She was laughing, head tilted back, wearing the same leather jacket I'd bought her 2 years ago. That detail hit harder than I expected. That jacket had been a gift after our trip to Seattle. She'd said it made her feel free. Now she was wearing it while standing in another man's arms. I closed the page, exhaled slowly. My pulse didn't spike, but something deep in me hardened. The next morning, I woke up early, showered, shaved, and went to work like always. My coworkers said I seemed calmer these days, more focused. They didn't know calm could be a form of war. The whispers about Ryan's garage grew louder. A local blogger mentioned suspicious billing practices. One of his suppliers delayed shipment due to account irregularities. Small tremors, but I knew what they meant. I sat at my desk that night, reviewing the growing thread of chaos. Phase 1, disruption, complete. Still, I didn't celebrate. A good plan always leaves room for the unexpected. And something told me this was only the beginning. I leaned back in my chair, eyes closed. In my mind, I could see her, Sarah, lying next to him, breathing evenly, unaware that the world around her was slowly shifting. I didn't want to destroy her. I wanted her to understand, to feel what it's like when the ground beneath you gives way, the way she'd made me feel that Friday night. I looked at the clock. 2:17 a.m. The cursor blinked on the next document. Phase 2, pressure points. Outside, the wind rattled the window. Inside, I smiled faintly, a whisper escaping my lips. Let's see how strong your perfect man really is. Every plan needs precision. I'd done my groundwork, rumor, reputation, rot. Now came the structure. If I wanted Ryan Miller to fall, it couldn't be from a single push. It had to look like gravity itself turned against him. The key was his debts. Small, manageable, but fragile. I'd already learned he owed several suppliers. All I had to do was buy that weakness. Through a shell company registered in Nevada, I purchased 2 of his outstanding invoices. Simple enough. A few phone calls, a lawyer who asked no questions, and a small transfer of money. On paper, I was now one of his creditors. The next step was less direct. One of his partners, Clay Jensen, was already drowning in his own mess. A tax irregularity here, a late payment there. I nudged the right domino. A small packet of anonymous documentation was sent to the state audit office. Nothing dramatic, just enough to draw attention. A week later, Clay's business was under inspection. Ryan's garage depended on him for parts. The delay hit fast and hard. When I called Martin to tell him, he whistled. "You're really doing it, huh?" "Doing what?" "Ruining a man's life." I paused. "No," I said quietly. "I'm just letting him ruin it himself." He didn't argue. He knew me well enough to understand there was no turning back. That night, I opened another bottle of whiskey. Not for comfort, for ritual. The amber liquid caught the lamplight, glowed like molten gold. My reflection in the glass looked calmer than I felt. I thought about Sarah, where she was at that moment. Maybe curled up beside him, asleep. Maybe listening to him complain about lost clients, bad luck, suppliers failing him. Did she defend him? Did she reassure him the world wasn't against him? Or did she stay quiet, sensing something wrong, but not knowing why. I wanted her to feel that uncertainty. The same slow dread I'd felt staring at her note. In the following days, I watched everything unfold like clockwork. Ryan's suppliers grew cautious. One of them demanded early payment, another postponed delivery. His clients noticed delays. Reputation started to slip again, but this time it wasn't digital. It was real, tangible. And all the while, I remained invisible. One afternoon, Martin came by my office. He dropped a folder on my desk and sat down heavily. "Bank reports," he said. "Your guy's account activity is irregular. He's shifting money between personal and business accounts. Looks like he's trying to stay afloat." I flipped through the papers. Numbers, transfers, desperation. "Good," I murmured. Martin frowned. "Good? Jesus, David. You were always the quiet type, but this is something else." "I told you," I said, closing the file. "I'm not angry. I'm efficient." He studied me for a moment. "You think she'll come back?" "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" "To make sure she understands what she traded me for. Silence. The kind that carries judgment without words." When he left, I stayed in the office long after dark. The rain outside drew streaks across the window, warping the reflection of city lights. In it, I saw the outline of a man I barely recognized, sharper, colder, quieter. A few days later, I got confirmation that Ryan had lost his first major contract, the logistics company that made up most of his income. The rumor was they didn't trust his stability. I'd made sure of that, a single anonymous email to their financial officer with attached concerns. Professional, subtle, lethal. The fallout was immediate. His cash flow collapsed. His employees got their paychecks late. People in town started whispering. Some said he'd gotten arrogant. Others said he'd crossed the wrong people. He probably stayed up at night trying to figure out who was pulling the strings. But I made sure there were no strings to see. That Friday, I went home earlier than usual. The air was cool, the street quiet. I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey and thought about the strange balance of justice. There's something erotic about control, not sexual in the crude sense, but intimate. Knowing you can move unseen, touch the shape of someone's life without ever being near them. It's a power few people experience without guilt. I didn't feel guilty. I felt awake. Later that night, I got an email from one of Martin's contacts confirming the tax office had expanded their investigation. Clay Jensen had been questioned. Ryan's shop was now indirectly on the radar. The web was tightening exactly as planned. I imagined Sarah watching him unravel, the exhaustion on his face, the short temper that came when things stopped making sense. She'd left me for excitement, for the rush of freedom. Now she was living with a man haunted by invisible weight. For a brief moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. I closed my laptop and stared at the dark window. My reflection looked unfamiliar, yet the eyes, they were steady. Not cruel, not kind, just certain. As I turned off the light, my phone buzzed. A message from Martin. "You've started something you can't undo." I typed back. "That's the idea." The glow of the screen faded. The house fell into darkness, save for the hum of the refrigerator, the same sound that had filled the silence that first night. Somewhere miles away, Ryan Miller was probably sitting in his garage, staring at unpaid bills, wondering when everything began to go wrong. And Sarah, she was learning slowly that freedom has a cost. The storm hadn't hit yet, but the air was shifting, and I was the one holding the wind. The funny thing about lies is that they don't break all at once. They crumble, piece by piece, quietly, until one day the truth is standing in the middle of the room, like a stranger you forgot you invited. From what I'd gathered, Ryan Miller's little empire was starting to collapse. The logistics contract was gone, his partner under audit, suppliers demanding payment. He still opened the garage every morning, but the smile he wore had turned mechanical. I imagined Sarah watching him, the tension in his jaw, the restless glances at his phone. The warmth between them must have begun to cool. That's how it happens, not through shouting, but through silence that grows too heavy to fill. And yet, a part of me still pictured her laugh, her touch, the way she used to breathe against my neck. Desire doesn't die with betrayal. It only becomes quieter, more dangerous. That thought haunted me the night I met Allison. She was the real estate agent who handled a listing I'd been looking at, a house on the city's edge. I didn't need a new place. I told myself it was just business, a property investment, something detached. But when I met her, detachment felt impossible. Allison was calm. Not beautiful in the polished way Sarah was, but in that soft, deliberate way that made you forget to breathe for a second. Her voice carried patience, and her eyes, a kind of knowing that unnerved me. "This one's quiet," she said, walking me through the front hall. "Good insulation, wide lot, faces west. You'll get sunsets." "Sunsets," I repeated, half listening. "I used to like those." "You don't anymore?" I guess I stopped noticing. She smiled, not pitying, just understanding. "Maybe this place will make you look again." Something in me stirred at that. A faint hum of connection. Not romance, something more elemental. After the showing, we stood by the porch. She brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, and I caught myself watching her hands. Steady, unhurried. It had been months since I'd looked at someone that way. "Would you like me to draw up an offer?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Cash." Her eyebrows lifted. That was quick. I don't like waiting. That night, when I signed the papers, I realized I'd just bought peace, or at least the illusion of it. The house felt empty, but in a way that comforted me. Meanwhile, I still monitored Ryan's decline. The reviews had quieted, but the financial rot had spread. I didn't need to interfere anymore. The system was devouring him. Every action had become a reaction. Every solution, a new problem. Martin kept feeding me updates. "He's trying to refinance," he said over the phone one afternoon. "But with that audit around his partner, no bank will touch him." "Perfect," I murmured. "David," he sighed, "you ever think this is enough?" Enough is a word people use when they've never lost something they thought would last forever. He didn't reply. Later that week, while scrolling through a local business forum, I stumbled upon a new thread. "Miller Automotive under pressure?" The comments were merciless. Some blamed him for being careless. Others mocked his rise and fall. The digital crowd loved a tragedy. And yet, I felt nothing. No triumph. No thrill. Just a quiet recognition. This was inevitable. The next evening, I met Allison again. She brought over some paperwork for the new house. We talked over coffee. She had that rare gift of making silence feel warm, not awkward. When she laughed, it wasn't loud, it was soft, like it belonged in that kitchen. At one point, her hand brushed mine as she reached for her cup. The touch was light, accidental, but something in me responded. A pulse. A reminder that I was still capable of feeling something other than vengeance. She noticed, smiled faintly, and changed the subject. She didn't flirt. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. That night, lying in bed, I thought about her, and then about Sarah. Sarah, who was probably arguing with Ryan by now. I could almost hear it, his raised voice, her defensive tone, the sound of something fragile cracking. It played in my head like a distant radio. "Why are you always angry?" "Because nothing's working, Sarah. You said you had everything under control." "I did. Until..." He'd stop there. He wouldn't know what came after. I smiled to myself, not out of cruelty, but satisfaction. Justice didn't need to shout. A week later, I visited the new house again. Allison was there, walking barefoot across the hardwood floor, checking the finish near the window. She looked up when I entered. "Settling in?" she asked. "Trying to. Empty houses are tricky. They echo until you fill them. With furniture? With something that makes them feel alive." She looked at me when she said it, and for a moment the air between us shifted. I felt that familiar pull, the kind that isn't about lust, but about loneliness recognizing its reflection. I wanted to reach for her, but didn't. Not yet. That night, I poured a drink and stared at the city lights from my new porch. In the distance, thunder rolled, a storm moving closer. I imagined Ryan pacing his workshop, yelling into his phone. Sarah watching from the doorway, her arms crossed, her mouth tight. The cracks were forming. Paradise was beginning to rot from within. And somewhere between the silence of that house and the hum of the wind, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't doing this for revenge anymore. I was doing it to feel alive. It started with a letter. A plain white envelope, stamped and folded, delivered to Ryan Miller's garage on a Monday morning. Inside, a notice from the tax department. Preliminary audit. Pending review of irregular documentation. The kind of thing that makes a man's stomach turn cold. I didn't need to send it myself. I'd already set the chain in motion. All I had to do now was watch gravity do its work. Through Martin's quiet channels, I heard how it unfolded. Within hours, Ryan's temper flared. He barked at his employees, slammed doors, cursed at phones. Clients who came for small repairs left uneasy, whispering afterward that something was off. A few days later, one of his former partners, the gambler Clay Jensen, demanded repayment of an old debt. He wanted his money before the audit went public. Ryan couldn't pay. That was the moment the walls began to crack. Sarah must have noticed. She always had that instinct. She could feel when tension was about to break. I imagined her standing in the kitchen of their rented home, arms folded, listening to him pacing back and forth. "You said you had everything under control." "I did," he'd shout, until someone started playing games. Games? What does that even mean? "It means somebody's trying to screw me, Sarah. You think all this is coincidence." She would go quiet then. That same silence she used to give me when she didn't know how to respond. The one that made you feel like you were arguing with a ghost. I poured myself a drink that night and sat by the window. I didn't feel triumph. I felt inevitability, like watching a structure you'd built finally collapse under its own weight. Martin called around midnight. "It's happening," he said. "His accounts are frozen. The audit's moving fast." "Good," I replied. "You sound calm." "I am calm." "You know," he hesitated, "most people don't come back from what you're doing. Once you start pulling strings like this, it doesn't stop at one person." "Then I'll make sure it stops exactly where I want it to." When I hung up, I looked around the new house. Still half empty, boxes, echoing footsteps, the faint smell of paint. But I liked it that way. The emptiness didn't accuse me. It waited. That week, I saw Allison again. She stopped by to check on some paperwork. She wore a simple gray dress that brushed her knees, and her hair was loose. When she smiled, the room felt lighter. "You've been working late again," she said. "Habit," I replied. "Or distraction? Maybe both." She handed me a folder. Our fingers brushed, just slightly. I didn't move. Neither did she. The air between us carried something quiet but undeniable. That low current of attraction that doesn't need words. "Do you ever regret anything?" I asked suddenly. She tilted her head. "Only when I forget why I did it." I smiled faintly. "That's a good answer." "You don't strike me as a man who forgets," she said softly. "No," I said. "I remember everything." She left not long after, and the scent of her perfume lingered in the room long after the door closed. It wasn't the same as Sarah's, warmer, subtler. For a moment, it steadied me. But peace never lasts. The next day, I got another update. Ryan's audit had escalated. The department found significant discrepancies. His lawyer advised him to settle, but he couldn't. The penalties alone would drown him. That night, I imagined their argument vividly. He'd be standing near the table, fists clenched, voice sharp. "You don't understand, Sarah. They're tearing the shop apart." "And what about us?" she'd say. "We barely talk anymore." "I'm trying to fix it." By screaming. By surviving. A pause. Then maybe she'd say it, the thing that breaks him. "You've changed." And in that moment, he'd realize she meant more than just his temper. It was strange how easy it was to picture. I wasn't there, but I could almost feel the heat of that room, smell the oil and sweat, hear her voice rising. The next day, a friend of Ryan's posted a cryptic message online. "Sometimes hard work isn't enough when luck turns on you." I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Late that evening, rain began to fall. I stood by the window, glass in hand, watching droplets trace paths down the pane. It was the same kind of night Sarah had left me. I thought of her again, not the woman who betrayed me, but the one who used to hum while washing dishes, who'd lean against me half asleep during old movies. The version of her that existed before the lies. I missed that woman, but she didn't exist anymore. I finished my drink and turned off the lights. The house was quiet, except for the distant thunder and the sound of rain on the roof. For a long time, I just stood there in the dark, listening. The calm after destruction has a strange beauty to it. The way silence feels like justice. Somewhere out there, Ryan Miller was staring at the ruins of his life. Sarah was crying, maybe. And I was finally breathing evenly again. But beneath that calm, something unexpected stirred. Not guilt, not joy. Just a question I couldn't quite silence. What now? 6 months. That's how long it took for everything to fall apart. I didn't follow every detail. I didn't need to. Once Ryan's shop went under, the rest wrote itself. Clients disappeared. Debts multiplied. The bank stepped in. He tried to rebuild. But there's a certain point where effort turns to dust. Through the quiet channels that had once fed me information, I heard the end came quickly. Assets frozen, eviction notice, staff gone. The last post on his business page read simply, "Closed for maintenance." It never reopened. Sarah, I imagined, tried to hold on at first. She'd always been the kind of woman who thought love could fix anything if you wanted it enough. But life doesn't bend for sentiment. Eventually, she packed what she could and left. I didn't expect to see her again. I thought she'd vanish into some coastal town, reinvent herself, pretend none of this ever happened. But guilt is magnetic. It pulls you back to where you broke something. And that's how, one gray morning in October, she returned. I didn't know until later that she'd driven through the night. Maybe she cried on the highway. Maybe she didn't. Either way, when she turned onto our old street, I imagine the world must have looked strangely unchanged. The same trees, the same quiet houses, the same illusion of peace. She must have hesitated before getting out of the car. The engine still running, the air thick with nostalgia. Then she'd see it, our house. Her house once. But it wasn't the same anymore. There was no overgrown ivy on the porch. The garden was trimmed, the windows cleaned. The place looked alive again, cared for. Only not by her. Inside the car, she probably held her phone for a long time, maybe scrolling through old photos of us. I imagine her thumb stopping on one in particular, the picture from our wedding day. Her eyes closed, lips curved, my hand on her waist. That song from our wedding, she'd still have it saved. I wonder if she played it as she drove. He was always too kind, she must have thought. Maybe he'll forgive me. She didn't know that kindness, once broken, turns into something sharper. I wasn't home that afternoon. I'd gone into the city to meet Martin for lunch, a rare attempt at normal life. He said I looked better lately. I told him I'd been sleeping again. That was true, in a way. When I came back, the air in the house felt different. It's strange how you can feel presence even after it's gone. A scent, a shift in the air, something electric in the silence. I noticed the front door slightly ajar, the faint trace of her perfume. My pulse didn't rise. I just stood there for a moment, listening to the echo of my own breath. She had been here. I saw the lightest imprint of her shoes on the entry mat, small, wet from the rain. And the old drawer in the kitchen, the one that started it all, was slightly open. I knew what she'd found. Inside that drawer, next to my old notebooks and a few papers, lay the note she left me 6 months ago. "I'm sorry, David. Don't look for me. I'm leaving with Ryan." And beside it now, her ring. I had placed it there one quiet night, not as a token of loss, but as evidence of closure. She must have looked at it for a long time. I could almost see her fingers trembling, almost hear her whisper my name into the empty kitchen. Then she left again, silently, this time leaving the door open, as if she couldn't quite decide whether she wanted me to know she'd been there. That night, I poured myself a drink and sat in the living room, lights dim. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows. I imagined her somewhere on the road again, headlights carving through fog, tears she wouldn't admit streaking her cheeks. She had come home and found it no longer hers. There was a strange satisfaction in that. Not joy, not revenge, just symmetry. The same drawer, the same note, the same silence. But now she was the one standing in it, hollowed out by her own choices. I didn't tell Allison about it right away. Later that week, when we were having dinner, she noticed I seemed distracted. "Long day?" she asked. Something like that. She reached across the table, her hand resting gently on mine. "You don't have to carry everything alone, you know." "I'm not," I said. "Not anymore." She smiled, but there was curiosity in her eyes. A silent question I didn't answer. She didn't press. She never did. That night, when she fell asleep beside me, I lay awake for a while, listening to her steady breathing. The warmth of her body against mine was grounding, real. And yet, a fragment of memory kept drifting back, a woman standing in my old kitchen, staring at a ring, realizing too late what she'd thrown away. Sarah had returned to the place she once called home. But homes change. People do too. As I turned off the bedside lamp, I whispered to the dark, almost without meaning to. She came back. Allison stirred beside me. "Nothing," I said softly. "Just an old ghost knocking on the wrong door." Outside, the wind carried the sound of distant rain, the same rhythm that had started this story. Only now, it no longer sounded like loss. It sounded like an ending. I've often wondered what it feels like to walk into a memory that no longer belongs to you. Sarah found out that day. I wasn't home when she arrived. I imagine she stood on the porch for a moment, her hand hovering near the door, the same hand that used to hold the key. And when the lock turned easily, when the hinges creaked the same familiar way, maybe she thought he never changed it. Maybe that meant something to her. She stepped inside expecting ghosts, but what she found instead was life. New, ordinary, thriving life. The house had changed. The living room smelled of coffee and cedarwood. The walls were lighter now, the curtains open. On the shelves, framed photos she didn't recognize. Landscapes, city lights, and in the center, one of me and Allison, smiling, the ocean behind us. I imagine Sarah froze there, trying to understand the picture. Her mind must have raced. Who is she? How long? But the answer was all around her. Allison was in the kitchen that morning, making coffee. She turned at the sound of the door. At first, I think she must have assumed it was me coming home early. But instead, there stood Sarah, rain on her coat, eyes wide with disbelief. "You must be Sarah," Allison said softly, setting down the mug. Sarah blinked, startled. "You know who I am? He told me about you." Silence stretched between them. Sarah's gaze darted around the room. The new furniture, the fresh flowers, the photograph on the counter. It must have felt like walking into a parallel version of her own life, one where she had been quietly erased. "He told you," she repeated, her voice fragile. "A little," Allison said. "Mostly that you were part of his past." There was no anger in Allison's tone. No triumph either. Just calm, the kind that disarms completely. That calmness was what drew me to her in the first place. Sarah's throat tightened. "Does he live here now?" "Yes," Allison said, pouring herself another cup. "We both do." That must have been the moment it sank in, that she wasn't visiting her home anymore. She was standing in someone else's. The air must have felt thick, heavy with things unsaid. I imagine Sarah's eyes falling on the small details, the books on the shelf, the blanket folded neatly over the armchair, 2 coffee cups instead of 1. Life had continued effortlessly, without her. And that, I think, is what hurt the most. When I came home later that day, the house felt strange again. I could tell something had shifted. Allison met me at the door, her expression unreadable. "She came," she said. "I didn't have to ask who." "Sarah." Allison nodded. "She didn't stay long." "What did she say?" "Nothing that mattered." Her tone was gentle, not bitter. She took my coat, hung it up, then added quietly, "She looked lost." "She always did," I murmured. Allison studied me for a moment. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said, and it was true, in a way I hadn't been for years. That evening, after dinner, I found myself standing by the window, looking out into the fading light. I thought about Sarah. her shoes clicking on the old tiles, her hand brushing the edge of the kitchen counter, her eyes finding that photograph of me and Allison. Maybe she realized then what I had learned months ago, that love doesn't disappear. It just changes owners. I opened the drawer in the hallway, the same drawer that had once held her note. The paper was still there, folded neatly, her handwriting still crisp. I stared at it for a while, remembering how it felt the first night I read it, the cold, the stillness, the quiet rage beneath my calm. Now, there was no rage, only distance. The words had lost their power. I closed the drawer and walked upstairs. Allison was waiting in bed, reading. When she saw me, she smiled, that small, unassuming smile that still managed to undo me. She looked at our picture. I said quietly, "Allison, set the book aside." "Good. Maybe it'll help her move on." I nodded, sitting beside her. "Do you think she will?" "I think she'll have to." For a moment, we said nothing. Then she reached out, her fingers tracing the back of my neck, a slow, grounding touch. I leaned into it, breathing her in. She didn't smell like Sarah. Hers was a different kind of warmth, steady and clean. "You don't regret any of it?" she asked softly. "No," I said. "Not anymore." She kissed me then, unhurried, deliberate. There was no desperation in it, no attempt to fill a void. It was simply two people existing in the same moment, present, alive. When we pulled apart, she whispered, "You deserve peace, David." "Maybe this is it," I said. "Maybe peace just looks like starting over." Downstairs, in the quiet kitchen, the scent of coffee still lingered, and on the shelf, the photo of us by the ocean caught the last light of day. Somewhere out there, Sarah was driving away from the house that used to be hers, headlights cutting through the dusk. I imagined her glancing once more in the rearview mirror, not to see the road behind her, but to watch what she could never reclaim. And I hoped, for both our sakes, that she finally understood. You can't come home to a place that's already moved on without you. I didn't see her car parked outside. By the time I came home that evening, she had already been there, gone again like a ghost that didn't know whether it wanted to haunt or be forgiven. But I knew where she would have gone. Upstairs, to the room that used to be ours. I could picture it perfectly. Her hand brushing the stair rail, her steps hesitant, her eyes searching for something familiar and finding none. The bedroom was different now. The bed facing the window instead of the wall, lighter sheets, new furniture. Still, she would have known exactly where to look. On the dresser, there was an envelope. I'd placed it there earlier that week, though I didn't know why at the time. Some quiet intuition. Inside was her wedding ring and a note. Her words to me, rewritten. "I'm sorry, Sarah. Don't look for me. I'm moving on." A perfect mirror. Same paper, same handwriting, same restraint. When she opened it, I imagined her reaction in fragments. The breath catching, the soft laugh that isn't amusement but disbelief, the weight of realization pressing in all at once. It's strange how poetic justice feels when it finally lands in silence. Maybe she sat on the edge of the bed, the same way I had that first night after she left, staring at a piece of paper that ended everything. Only now it was her turn. I wonder what went through her mind. If she thought of Ryan, of the months that followed, of the wreckage they both crawled out of. Or maybe she thought of me, sitting in this house with another woman, living a life that looked untouched by her absence. The truth is, I had rebuilt everything she'd broken, piece by piece, quietly, deliberately. And now she stood in the middle of it, realizing she'd become the ghost in her own story. I heard from a neighbor later that she'd stayed for a while, just sitting there. No crying, no shouting, just stillness, the kind that happens when pain has no shape left. It's strange. I didn't want revenge anymore. Not really. I just wanted the world balanced again. I wanted her to feel what I'd felt, the sharp edge of being replaced, the hollow ache of being forgotten by someone who once knew every inch of your soul. When I went upstairs that night, the air felt heavier, her perfume still faintly in the room. I walked to the dresser and saw the envelope slightly bent, opened. The ring was gone. She'd taken it. I smiled. That somehow felt right. I sat on the bed and stared at my reflection in the mirror across the room. The man, looking back, wasn't the one she'd left. The quietness in his eyes wasn't numbness, it was understanding. Behind me, Allison's voice drifted up the stairs. "David? You're quiet again." "Just thinking," I said. She appeared at the doorway, leaning lightly against the frame. The soft lamplight caught her hair, the same warm tone as the whiskey I used to drink too much of. "About her?" "About what used to be," I admitted. "Does it still hurt?" "No," I said after a pause. "It's just strange to remember who I was back then." She crossed the room, sat beside me. Her hand found mine, fingers warm and steady. "Then maybe that's enough," she said. "You don't have to erase her. Just outgrow her." That word, outgrow, lingered. I looked at her, really looked. Allison didn't fill a void. She existed beside it, quietly, without needing to prove anything. She was peace, not distraction. When she kissed me, it wasn't passion that surged through me, but clarity, the feeling of coming back to the present after being trapped too long in the past. Later, after she'd gone downstairs, I stayed a while longer, staring at the mirror. In it, I saw both versions of myself layered over each other, the man who waited, and the one who stopped waiting. Somewhere out there, Sarah was driving through the city, maybe holding that ring in her palm, maybe whispering to herself the same words I once had. "Don't look for me." But the difference was, I meant it when I said it. There was no hate left, no fire, just calm, the quiet kind that comes after every storm finally spends itself. I closed the drawer, turned off the lamp, and stood for a moment in the dim reflection. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt settled, whole. Sarah had left twice now. The first time, she broke something. The second time, she confirmed it could never be fixed. I looked at my reflection one last time and said softly, "Goodbye." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant to be. It was just truth. Then I walked downstairs toward the light, toward Allison, toward the life I'd built from ashes. Even after everything, the noise, the silence, the wreckage, peace came quietly. It didn't arrive with forgiveness. It arrived with stillness. I woke before dawn that morning. The sky outside was gray, soft, and the air carried that faint chill that comes before rain. Allison was still asleep, her hair spilling over the pillow, her breathing slow and steady. I lay there for a long time just listening, to her, to the house, to the quiet rhythm of a life that no longer hurt. I'd thought peace would feel triumphant. It didn't. It felt ordinary. Dishes drying on the rack. The scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen. The sound of the wind moving through clean, open rooms. When I finally got up, I walked downstairs barefoot. The floor creaked beneath me, familiar and alive. I poured coffee, opened the drawer by the counter. The same drawer that had once held every ghost of my past. The note was still there. The one I'd written to Sarah. "I'm sorry, Sarah. Don't look for me. I'm moving on." The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges. I stared at it for a while, my reflection faintly visible in the polished wood of the counter. It struck me then, how something so small could hold an entire history. A beginning, an ending, a lesson written between lines of apology and defiance. Allison came down a few minutes later, still in her robe, her eyes half asleep. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Didn't need to," I said. "Just woke early." She smiled and came closer, wrapping her arms around me from behind. Her chin rested on my shoulder. "Everything all right?" "Yeah," I said. "Everything's right." We stood like that for a while, the morning light creeping across the floor. There was no tension anymore, no shadow hanging in the corners. Just the quiet pulse of normal life. After breakfast, she left for a meeting. The sound of her car fading down the road left the house wrapped in silence again, not the kind that once felt hollow, but the kind that simply is. I walked through each room slowly, like a man tracing the outlines of something he's finally learned to appreciate. The sunlight hit the picture frames on the wall, catching that photo of us at the ocean. I remember the wind that day, how she'd laughed when the water splashed too high, how she'd grabbed my hand instinctively. That laughter had erased so many of the echoes Sarah left behind. Still, as I stood there, I found myself whispering, "She came, didn't she?" The words felt strange out loud. Not a question, really. More of an acknowledgement. When Allison came home later that evening, She set her bag on the counter and gave me that knowing look. She came, didn't she? Yeah, I said quietly. She found what she left behind. Allison didn't ask what that meant. She didn't need to. She walked over, kissed me lightly on the cheek, and started making dinner. That was her gift, never demanding explanations, only presence. After we ate, I washed the dishes while she read on the couch. The sound of water running, her occasional laugh at something in the book, it was such a simple harmony, but it felt profound. When the dishes were done, I went back to the drawer. The note still waited there, folded, patient. I slid it back inside and closed it gently, the same way I had on that first night, when everything began. The difference now was that I no longer felt the tremor in my hand. I turned off the kitchen light, walked into the living room, and stood behind Allison. She looked up at me, smiling. Tired? No, I said softly. Just thinking. About her? About endings, I said. She closed the book and reached for my hand. Then let's not dwell on them. I nodded. She was right. Some stories don't end. They just stop hurting. Later that night, after she'd fallen asleep, I stood once more by the window. Outside, the sky was clear again. The rain had come and gone, leaving the streets glistening under the lamplight. I thought about Sarah, wherever she was now. Maybe she kept the ring. Maybe she'd thrown it away. Maybe she was learning, the way I had, that love doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. I whispered into the quiet, more to myself than anyone else. You told me not to look for you. I didn't. I just waited. The words lingered in the still air, gentle as the night itself. I closed the window, turned off the lamp, and crawled back into bed beside Allison. Her warmth found me easily, her breathing steady, unbothered. For the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of everything lift, not erased, but accepted. I closed my eyes and let the silence settle, the final trace of storm fading into calm. And in that perfect stillness, I understood. Sometimes moving on isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to live in the peace you built from what broke you.